Talking to William Black, former bank regulator at the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation. In the 80s, he helped expose the savings and loan scandal. Now he's a professor at University of Missouri, Kansas City, and author of the book, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. We'll be back with him, and then we'll be joined by the Slovenian public intellectual, Slavoj Žižek, at the end of the broadcast. Stay with us. The Kronos Quartet, Requiem for a Dream. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guest is William Black, former bank regulator at the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation, now a professor at University of Missouri, Kansas City, wrote The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One, How Corporate Executives and Politicians Looted the S&L Industry. So let's go back more than, about a quarter century now, William Black, to your specialty, to exposing the savings and loan scandal. What happened then, and how does it relate to today?
What happened then was an epidemic of what we call in criminology control fraud, and that means what happens when the fraud is led by the person who controls a seemingly legitimate corporation or government agency. In this case, they were savings and loans. And these frauds were growing at an annual rate of over 50%. Their weapon of choice is accounting fraud. So it's real easy. It's a three-part optimization. First thing you do is grow like crazy, Ponzi-like scheme. Second thing you do is deliberately make really bad loans because they have a higher interest and higher expenses associated with them, so you report more profits. And the third thing you do is have extraordinary leverage. Leverage is simply lots of debt compared to your equity. And the point of this is, if you do those three things, you are mathematically guaranteed to report not just profits, but record profits.
But William Black,
at that kind of...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
At that kind of growth rate, with people concentrating on whatever the optimal area is for the fraud, you produce financial bubbles. In the case of the savings and loan crisis, we re-regulated the industry in the face of opposition from the Reagan administration, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. And we looked for the Achilles heel for this kind of scheme, which is growth. And so we restricted growth, and this kind of fraud also creates a distinctive pattern of operations. And we use that to triage and to go after these institutions while they were still reporting they were the most profitable savings and loans in America. People thought we were crazy contemporaneously, who were conservative economists. But it turned out we were right about every single one of these institutions. What does it mean for today? The same thing. We have another epidemic of accounting fraud. In this case, it's not commercial real estate, which it was in the savings and loan crisis. It started out with, in the United States context, with home mortgages.
But William Black, it's been amply documented the extensive level of the fraud that occurred in this current crisis. I remember seeing the emails that Attorney General of New York, Andrew Cuomo, secured, which showed that, for instance, countrywide, whenever it started getting appraisals of properties that it did not like, it fired the appraisers. It got rid of them. It told them they wanted higher appraisers. All along the line on these no-doc loans, there was constant fraud occurring. The lawyers that were involved in the cases, the real estate appraisers, the people who were packaging the loans, and yet, except for the occasional Madoff or a couple of individuals, there's been no sort of criminal prosecution of these folks.
Well, when you say it's been amply demonstrated, you're right, but only where people have looked. And people, to pick up your latter point, have generally not looked. So what happened? The FBI transferred 500 of its white-collar crime specialists out of white-collar crime into national security in response to the 9/11 attacks. And, you can understand why they did that, but you can't understand why the Bush administration refused the FBI request to allow them to replace the lost agents. And so white-collar prosecutions were down more than 25% under the Bush administration during the greatest wave of white-collar crime in the history of the world. The FBI has also testified that 80% of the mortgage fraud losses occur when lender personnel are involved. To add to your point about appraisers, the only reason you inflate an appraisal is for fraud. There's no other purpose in the world. And we have survey information that's quite good on appraisers. In 2003, 70% reported that they had been the subject of an attempt to intimidate them to inflate appraisal values in that year alone. When we did the same survey in 2007, that percentage was up to 90%. So we have horrific, endemic fraud, and it's coming out of the lenders, not the poor people who can't pay the mortgages. And that is what brought this crisis.
William Black, the New York Times recently reported that Citigroup has hired Richard Holt, who was a top lobbyist for the savings and loan industry in the 1980s.
Yes, he is the most notorious lobbyist out of the savings and loan crisis. Even within a notorious group, the U.S. League of Savings Institutions, which back then was the political scientist types, often said it was the third most powerful lobbying group in America. That group had, in essence, a black ops subgroup, and Richard Holt led it and is responsible for causing immense damage in the savings and loan crisis. Beyond that, of course, he then comes back in the slime campaign when Wilson went public with some of his protests against the lying about the intelligence that got us into the war, the invasion of Iraq. Richard Holt reappears. And now he's back being hired by, in essence, by taxpayer money to help loot the taxpayers again. My phrase for it, the New York Times, was that it was singularly obscene.
I wanted to ask you about the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission that opened on September 17th. What do you expect to get out of it? I was looking at a piece in The Nation by William Grider. He says Chairman Phil Angelides, the former California State Treasurer, said his purpose is to uncover the facts and providing an unbiased historical accounting of what brought our financial system and our economy to its knees. Grider goes on to say, in the New Deal years, the congressional investigation led by Ferdinand Pecora helped build the case for landmark regulatory regulation reforms, legislation establishing the Securities Exchange Commission, Glass-Steagall Act, which separated commercial banks and risk-taking investment banks. Like Pecora, Angelides doesn't intend to propose policy solutions, but simply to discover what really happened. Your thoughts on it?
Well, it's true that the Pecora Commission was critical to successful reforms.